Well, good morning, everyone. It is time. Got 8 o'clock, ready to start another DAACAT, DEKALB Asgrow Alloy Current Agronomic Topics. So a lot of things to cover, hopefully very interesting and very useful for this time of the year. But I guess first and foremost, for those who don't know me, Jim McDermott, technical agronomist in the western side of Northwest Iowa. And we continue to add, which is good. We've got 3 names now on the list. Nora, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll get to Dustin.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nora Schultz. I cover the west central part of western Iowa, so Highway 20 to I-80, I-35 to I-29, roughly. I live in Lakeview, Iowa, and I came onto the role just about 6 weeks ago, and happy that Jim finally has a full set of hands to help him here in Northwest Iowa.
I'm happy about that too, Nora. Yeah, good to have you. And then another relatively new face. Some of you may know Dustin Rennert, but certainly glad to have Dustin on. Started a week ago Monday. So, Dustin, I'm going to jump into your slide and let you introduce yourself and a little bit about your background.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to be here. Like Jim said, kind of started my second week. For those that don't know me, was born in Muscatine on a dairy farm, went on to Iowa State to get a degree in agronomy, and then somehow didn't really want to move back to Muscatine and took a job in Terrell, Iowa, out of school as a retail sales agronomist as Farmers Co-op Elevator Company at the time. Spent 5 years there and decided to move back to the center part of the state and lived in Ames for a little while. So I got 8 years experience as a sales agronomist, working with growers. Spent some time with Growmark, calling on AgriLand FS in Southeast Iowa. And then the last 10, 11 years, moved back to Northwest Iowa, live in Spencer with my wife, Alyssa. Her family farms down by Sioux Rapids. But the last 10 years or so, kind of had a dual role working at Winfield United as a DSM. But then along with that, kind of morphed into leading the seed business at Ag Partners. And then the last 3 years, took on a role as a regional agronomy business leader, basically a sales manager, had 13 direct reports, sales agronomists reporting up to me. So, live in Spencer, just up the road from Jim. My territory would be east of Highway 71, kind of over to Algona, down to Highway 20 corridor. That's kind of the rough area I'll be covering. Big fisherman, huge Iowa State fan, but happy to be here.
Well, and we are certainly happy to have you, Dustin. So welcome again.
Nope, and appreciate it.
Good to have a full staff again. All right, we'll jump right in, and nice full agenda. Again, welcome, Dustin. We'll do a trivia question, a little bit of an update on GDUs, talk about how some of the growth looks and the stands that we have, some other current topics, including sandblasted, beat up corn, certainly been plenty of that. Finish up with a spotlight product, and then at the very end, we'll have the QR code for those that are CCA that you can get half credit in crop management. So start off with a trivia question, fairly timely for the corn post-emerge spray window here. So Diflex and Diflex Duo, a couple key products that really have been growing significantly the last few years, especially with a lot of the HPPD resistances showing up. So the question for this morning is, what is the spray window for Diflex or Diflex Duo? So essentially, what can we go up to as far as growth stage on corn or height? And we've got a correct answer by Scott O'Connell. Quick with the trigger this morning. Well done, Scott. So we've got officially Diflex timing is pre up to V10 or 36 inches, whichever comes first. Diflex Duo with the glyphosate premix up to V7 or 36 inches, which V7 is normally going to come before 36 inches. And being that label is V10 or 36, we don't necessarily have to wait that long or go up to that. And obviously we know we've got a safe formulation of dicamba in Diflex, but my recommendation is I would want to have it sprayed probably closer to V7, V10, V8, and not push that V10 or 36 inches. Just my feeling, even though we've got a safe formulation. Once we get that size on corn, just anytime we're directing post-emerge products into the whirl, sometimes we can see some issues even just from the adjuvants in that tank mix. So that's where we're at, and we're a long ways off from hitting that window, but we know it'll be here before we know it. All right, well, let's jump in on our GDU accumulation. Picked Kossuth County for this morning. Still running ahead, but if you remember, especially 2 weeks ago, we were running about 100 ahead on our mid-April planting dates. Obviously, we've been a little bit cooler since then, but still on the positive side. So from the 11th of April planting dates, 399 GDUs, 26 ahead of the long-term average, and then you can see the others. So still on the plus side, but been losing ground here lately. But sounds like that'll change, especially from Thursday, Friday on. Looks like we've got above normal heat and fairly dry conditions. So hopefully we're heading into a nice warming trend. Get this corn and soybeans growing again. Well, remember, every new leaf takes about 85 GDUs to develop. So, pretty easy to see why we haven't really been able to put on too many leaf collars or have this corn taken off. We're still getting some growth, but been fairly slow here lately. So not accumulated many GDUs over the last week. All right, well, let's jump into our current topics. And Nora, why don't you start us off? Have some pretty rough looking corn, even though it's got decent size, but what all are we seeing there?
Yeah, good morning, guys. So these are some pictures from down in Sac County when we had, not last Thursday, so 2 weeks ago tomorrow, or 2 weeks, yeah, we had quite the little dust storm event, and I'm not sure how many others of you had the wall of dust coming at you on that Thursday afternoon, but we definitely ended up with some beat up corn from that flying debris, from those exceptionally strong hot winds. And this is just some good pictures that I got of the damage that guys might be seeing. And I wanted to call your attention to it because if a grower were to walk into this, especially as we get into post-spray time, it can be a little panic inducing for them. Go, what happened to my corn? So sandblasting from the particle damage could look like ripped leaves. It can look like these kind of yellow-brown lesions that you can see on the left side that farmers might be like, what my corn's sick, what's going on? You can also see some buggy whipping, like in this picture on the right. This can be, especially the buggy whipping, I noticed was a little bit more hybrid dependent. So there were, in this field actually, and I didn't get a super great picture of it, but it was it's a side-by-side field. So one hybrid was showing this buggy whipping, one wasn't. And it always, when somebody sees this, we lead to the question of who sprayed what on my field. This, we should be growing out of this pretty quickly as we move on to new leaves. They won't show this physical damage. But so we're not really worried about yield impacts overall, but going forward, we may see some higher incidences of diseases like Goss's wilt or maybe some bacterial leaf streak. That is not, obviously we know Goss's wilt can be pretty significant yield wise on the right genetics or things like that. Bacterial leaf streak, not something that generally causes a yield impact, but just something that you might see more prevalent going forward this year. Any comments, Jim or Dustin?
Well, I was just going to ask, had this field been sprayed post-emerge, Nora?
It had not.
Mhm.
Still hasn't. We still have not made it there.
Kind of what I figured. Because, we're talking about Diflex and Diflex Duo earlier, sometimes you can see some wrapping. Same thing with status, some of the growth regulator products can cause some of that, usually temporary, but is very much similar to the AGS, accelerated growth syndrome, or just buggy whipping from wind. So, really three things can cause that type of symptom.
And we should grow out of it as soon as we get some sunshine and some nice weather. Everything will come out of it just fine, and it'll look like a whole new field. So nothing to worry about, but you guys might get some calls, especially as guys start rolling on post spray. How about the next slide, Jim?
Yeah, this was a shot took last Friday, I believe. A little smaller corn, although this was actually planted fairly early. This was a April 14th planting, but beat up pretty good, just like a lot of fields, where we've got the sand blasting and just breakage from wind. Even some plants that were mowed off at the surface. Obviously, that growing point is below ground and protected. Sometimes, though, the regrowth is uneven. We can have the dead tissue cause disease or not allow that regrowth to happen at an even pace. Typically it's going to catch up and be fine, but once in a while in these really tough beat up fields, just like hail, that regrowth is uneven enough where it might affect ear size. But I think that's going to be the exception rather than the rule, but it could be a few out there. I do have the Delaro and Delaro Complete guidelines there. Like Nora mentioned, I think with physical damage, typically it's more the viral diseases like Gossa's wilt. And obviously it's early, so may not have real high risk, but any time during the season, we can increase that risk of diseases and even the fungal diseases. Personally, I've never been huge as far as seeing a real consistent response to these early fungicide applications. But there no question there's cases where you can see response. You always try to figure out when and why, and it tends to be cases in my mind where we've got a little more higher yield potential, or if we do have that physical damage, or if we've got conditions that are conducive to Fusarium crown rot, which typically is more saturated soil conditions early. But just with physical beat up plants, maybe the year to try. Some of these scenarios where we're using the lower rates of Delaro Complete. Obviously, the bigger the corn, the more it's going to uptake that fungicide and have a chance to get into the plant. That, to me, if we're using fungicide in the vegetative state here early or pairing it up with the herbicide, the longer we can wait, the better. And for our post-emerge herbicides on some of these beat up fields, it's just as well to let the regrowth happen, get a couple new leaves out before we're hitting it ideally. And we've been cool enough where hopefully that also is going to coincide with some more heat too. So that's really going to help us out if we can get some size and get a chance to have a little better uptake from a fungicide. Other comments, Nora, Dustin, before we move on here?
Oh, there's just been I've gotten quite a few calls about growers wanting to do something with this beat up corn. We had a lot of wind in Northwest Iowa, and this corn looks pretty rough from sand blasting and lack of heat and sunlight. But hopefully we get that to change by this weekend.
I'm going to drop in the chat a support document from Climate that talks about if you do an application, how to do a field region report and get that application comparison trial yield information without much work, right? Just circle an area, sprayed or no sprayed. So if you guys are going out and trying any of this, I encourage you to gather as much data as possible so that we can look at the end of the year and make data-driven decisions.
Yeah, great point. So there hasn't been a lot of replants, boy, especially compared to last year, which has been a great thing, but still a few scenarios that we need to look at and determine if there is a need for replant. We're at the point now, almost hitting June 1st. Our top end yield potential is around that 80% level. So 18 to 20,000 roughly is a threshold for replanting on corn. So going to have to be a pretty tough looking stand. Overall, stands have been good, but, a fair amount of fields where, we have lost that 10% from our dropped population just with some of the cool weather that it went through. And we did have some cool rain events, especially around the Easter weekend. So there has been some stand loss this year, no question about it. Same thing on the soybean side. The soybean scenario, and we did talk 2 weeks ago on a lot of these no-till fields, seems like especially planted 23rd, 22nd of April, where they were having a hard time coming just from various reasons. A lot of times some crusting or difficult to get the seed to soil contact with the heavy residue that we were dealing with this year. So I know there's been some soybean fields, especially no-till, where growers have done some replanting and spiked population back in. At this point, I would be around that 75 to 80,000 plants per acre as far as a threshold. We've got still good yield potential at that level. Again, it's just a matter of getting our canopy, getting our consistency out there of weed control with our plant stand. Yield wise, as we get into early June, we still have good yield potential on soybeans. We know that, but we also know that this year, I hope we see some separation, because there's a lot of early planted beans, and it's going to be interesting to watch those flowering dates, especially if we crank back up on heat units. But hopefully we can take advantage of those second week or mid-April planting dates and see an advantage. Even though on a chart like this, the yield spread doesn't seem huge, if we can get that early flowering from those April planting dates, then I think that yield spread starts to become much wider. Nora, how about on the insect front?
Yeah, so in good news, we are slowing down on our black cutworm moth reports. You can see that there were a handful of moths caught in traps across the state. These are done by Iowa State University. No significant flights reported for the past week, so that is good news. We are in the cutting dates for our part of the world from those earlier significant flights that we had when we started doing our calls. So just make sure that you're keeping an eye on any double pro fields, or maybe if you have some conventional or Roundup traded fields for a couple guys. Those would be the fields we'd want to take a peek at, especially if they had heavy weed pressure early, heavy cover crops, things like that. But we are seeing a decrease in our black cutworm moth reports, which is great news. Next slide, I think, is the cutting dates. Yep. So we're right. We've already hit our cutting dates. I've seen one plant cut off that I assume is cut off by a cutworm. So I can handle that for the season. We'll take it and run as a win. But we are going to start talking about some of our other kind of bigger pests going forward, and that is corn rootworm time. So GDU calculations, we do them for crops all the time, right? Jim opens up this call with GDU calculations for corn. There is a difference in the calculation for corn rootworm. So I like to explain that GDUs are like the rate of molasses flowing into my bucket. Either the molasses is flowing faster or flowing slower, and we're accumulating it in a bucket. And so when we're accumulating the energy for corn rootworms, we start from January 1, and we do use a base 52. And so we are trying to hit that circle, that math, that predictive number is for when are we starting to see egg hatch? When do larvae start feeding on roots? And so for the state of Iowa, from January 1, 684 to 767, 700. If you remember 700, that's great. So the next slide, Jim, talks about we are currently ahead of schedule just a little bit, just like with Jim's crop numbers. We were 130 GDUs ahead at one point, but you can see there are some parts of the state that are hitting, especially in that southeast portion part of the state, are hitting peak hatch windows. I think that once we get our warm weather going into this weekend and into next week, we will start hitting our peak hatch. And I'm going to drop this link in the chat as well, that you can go, and this Mesonet link does the calculation on base 52. And so we just want you guys to be aware that This is the next up and coming insect when we're doing the predictive numbers. So Jim, if you go to the next slide, just a refresher of what our favorite little buddies look like this time of year. They are small white with a dark head, and they, when feeding on small roots, they create this scarring that you can see right above my thumb there. And when looking at corn roots, we can't be for sure that that is corn rootworm damage. So we want to make sure, and this is something we're probably going to talk about in newsletters in future weeks, but God took pity on us and said, oh, this is pretty wicked pest. I'm going to make them float. And so we can, if you're seeing some damage, starting to see some scarring in some cornfields that you either know have pressure or you're surprised have pressure, a bucket of water with that big root mass and that soil in there, those rootworms, those little white friends of ours, will float to the top and wiggle right on the top of the water to help you identify them going forward. So nothing there's not an action item here at this point, but just wanted you to be aware that just like our crops, we are slightly ahead of average going forward. And especially in fields that maybe got planted later or a replant scenario, just want you to be aware, because when corn rootworms feed on a root, if it's a smaller plant, that feeding is a larger percentage of the root mass than might be normal. So that can lead to bigger impacts. You know, obviously water, the amount of water we have in these fields is going to impact the reaction the plant has to losing roots. So just want you guys to be aware of it going forward. And then, do I have my video of float tests in here? I don't think I do. But the next slide, Jim, is something that I know you guys are busy, but maybe some of you have some interns or some younger sellers that you want to get experience with corn rootworm. This is a program from Bayer called The Watch, and I will drop this in the chat as well, or you can use the QR code. You can get free corn rootworm sticky traps, which I know that seems far away, but it's not. We put them out at tassel and silking time. It has how-to guides, it has the recommendations, has information on traits, all that support. So if you have a grower you're wanting to really target with some extra attention, or like I said, a younger seller, an intern, this might be a really good project to get them started in the corn rootworm space and get some extra information for your neighborhoods. Jim or Dustin, I know I like rootworms, unfortunately, talking about them. So that was long-winded, but.
No, a lot of good stuff, Nora. And you're right. With the heat, it sounds like it's coming. We may be able to start seeing rootworm larvae, or especially the scraping on roots, in a week to 10 days time, which would be earlier than normal. And, looks like a relatively dry spell. So that, of course, will help increase the survivability as they hatch out. So it will be interesting to watch to see what we're dealing with for pressure. One last thing, too, just on the cutworm. I know it's not been high risk, and we're getting close to being out of the woods anyway, because once we get to V5 corn, that gets size-wise really beyond what they can do to cut a plant. So looks like we're going to, unless something crazy happens here in the next week, looks like we're going to be in good shape on the cutworm.
Well, and the last thing I'll say about GDUs and a pest is that we do also calculate GDUs for weeds. We use base 48. This is a great chart that comes out of Iowa State University called IPM 64. And this shows the expected GDUs for 10% of the population emergence. So, and we can see that the tags underneath, yellow means a short emergence window, orange means a medium length emergence window, and those red weed species have a very long extended emergence window. We know that that's what we're going to be fighting with things like water hemp. So we are seeing water hemp emergence. And if you go to the next slide, Jim, I have my lovely counting. Oh, no, I forgot this one was in there. This is a great image that I thought some of my farmers really found kind of like eye-opening of how quickly things can escalate when it comes to water hemp growth, 1.5 inches a day. Things can really take off. And as we get that heat coming this week, not only our corn and soybeans are going to grow really well, but so are our weeds. So I did, the next picture is what I wanted to show you guys. I went out into a very woolly field that I have on my routes, and I pulled a plant. You can see it's less than 2 inches tall, and I did count 7 growing points already on that plant that's 1.5 inches tall. Then we go to this one that's less than 4 inches tall, and I counted 18 growing points. And so when we are going for our post spray, we want to make sure we understand the size of the plants that we're spraying and getting that good coverage, making sure we have plenty of water, because we need to hit every single one of these growing points so that it doesn't come back like the Hydra. I've been messing with the AI to do images, and I'm working on getting one that's a water hemp plant with all the Hydra heads coming out, if anyone knows that from Greek mythology. We have to hit every single one of these. And so good coverage, full rates, knowing what's out there is really important, because I thought this was a good visualization of escalating quickly. So any other comments or questions?
Good visualization that scares the heck out of you. No.
Unfortunately.
Well, and then just wrap up on the post spraying. This shows the window of application for a lot of different herbicides, and especially like we mentioned before, the Diflex and a number of products where we know we've got a little time, but we also know we don't want to push it too much, and we want to be timely, and especially if we're using some pre-products. If we've got some of our acetochlors, then we know we've got to be cut off a little sooner than our just straight post products or products that are containing the HPPDs as a pre. As much resistance as there is out there with the HPPDs, we know we still get good residual out of them when they're soil applied, as long as they get a little moisture for activation, but still fairly effective to use that HPPD in season to help on our overlapping residuals. And just to touch on, with Diflex does have the cyprosulfonamide, the CSI safener, so does make a huge difference, obviously, as compared to the straight dicambas, the sterling blues of the world. There's a lot of those out there in sheds, and they get very scary if they're sprayed post-emerge on corn. And we saw some of the results of that last year as far as some early stalk breakage and green snap. So, preaching to the choir here, but definitely want to be using the safened dicamba post-emerge in corn. And Dustin, I think in your travels yesterday, you're running across.
Yeah, guys, I just wanted to bring this up, I guess, as we're out looking at soybean fields. You might get a few calls, and some things get characterized, they're identified as maybe a disease, but this was not that. Some of these you maybe start thinking it's Pythium, but you need to start looking at the roots. And if you don't see any water soaked lesions, we had some cooler, wetter conditions here that conducive to Pythium, but really this is a splashback from herbicide. We can get our PPOs or some metribuzin, especially as we put that concentrated layer on some over-the-top spray, and you have that concentrated layer. It's not worked in at the soil surface, and you get these hard driving rains that can splash that herbicide off. And this was a no-till field as well, so you have a lot of trash out there that herbicide can be laying on that and not worked into the soil from any rain, and it splashes back, gets on your cotyledons and leaves, and you get this necrotic tissue, interveinal chlorosis. Some of these look pretty tough. There's one in that lower right, it kind of took off the top growing point. But as you look at the plant, it's shooting off new growth out of the cotyledons and even below that dead tissue. So it'll be fine, especially as we look at the weather forecast we have coming up, get some heat, some sun, and this field will look a lot better. But just the thing to keep in mind when you're out looking at these soybean fields, you might find some funny looking things that might get identified as a disease that it's not a disease. Look at the root. Mm-hmm. Any other comments?
Nope. Great points, Dustin. And yeah, it seems like this year been very conducive environmental conditions for herbicide injury, both from the PPOs as well as the triazine carryover. And sometimes it's kind of an additive effect when it's got metribuzin on for this year. All right, well, we are at that point. We need to wrap up. Just finish with the spotlight product here. An oldie but a goodie, DKC 5982 as a double pro. Been around for a while, but still stable. Still one of our key products, especially if we are on some variable soils, droughty soils. Always been have really good ability to take that stress. Pretty versatile too. Wouldn't stick around this long if it hadn't been able to work in different types of years as well as different soil types. So a good solid product. One thing to keep in mind on this one, it's responsive to fungicides. So as we get into our fungicide season, keep that in mind on either 5981 or 5982. And that is where we wanted to wrap up. So bring up the last slide with our QR codes, one for the CEUs for the CCAs there in the lower left, and then the other QR code if you want to be on the mailing list, email list for agronomic updates that come from Bayer under our agronomist name. Always some good information that comes out from that newsletter as well.
Have a great day, everybody.
Nope. Excited to be here. Get to meet the ones I do not know, but looking forward to it.
Yeah. Glad to have you, Dustin. Glad to have you, Nora. And yes, thanks everyone for being on. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day.